I have read this entire book, still don't understand the title. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. This week is an atypical romance because we do not have just one love interest. No, not two love interests that would make a love triangle. No, instead we have a love pentagon. And we all know that serious business happens in the Pentagon. Intrigue, political discussions, trade deals, Willow the White House cat. By the way, do you know that there have been many official White House pets? There have been cats, dogs, birds, and even raccoons. Actually, one of the most interesting White House pet stories to me is the story of Rebecca Raccoon, who originally was slated to be part of the Thanksgiving feast of President Coolidge. President Coolidge admitted that raccoons were maybe not on the menu for him, so he decided to have Rebecca the raccoon pardoned. She actually turned out to be a pretty decent White House pet, if you counted the fact that she turned over potted plants and unscrewed light bulbs as just charming and not dangerous. How can you not love a little raccoon bandit? Rebecca was so loved at the White House actually that they tried to introduce another raccoon to make a little family named Reuben, who was supposed to be her suitor. However, Reuben was not a match, and apparently Reuben was chased out of the White House numerous times by none other than Rebecca, who thought he was an intrusion. Reports from First Lady Grace Coolidge said, "Rebecca has lived alone and has her own way so long that I fear she was a little overbearing and dictatorial, and perhaps reminding her spouse that he was living on her bounty." Afterward, Rebecca continued to live in single blessedness. And if that seemed like misdirection from today's book review, this entire book today is about misdirection, because we're reading the book Under the Net by Iris Murdoch. This book is number 95 on the Modern Library's book of the top 100 novels of the 20th century. I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading all 100 novels this year, and while the videos themselves are taking a while to get edited, the book challenge is going quite well. I hope to update you a little bit more about that in the near future. However, if you want to follow me on TikTok where I discover or talk about other book trends or more modern books, feel free to follow me there. Now, a not so TLDR summary of Under the Net. Something that you need to understand about this book to actually understand what this book is trying to tell you is that Iris Murdoch was a philosophy professor, and she was doing her debut novel Under the Net with the pretenses, I think, of trying to write a philosophical novel. And if you've ever read a very deep work that references lots of philosophy, you know that those books are confusing. She was someone that I think studied a lot of Wittgenstein, who is an Austrian philosopher that was very popular in the 20th century and had a huge impact on 21st century philosophy. But the good news is you don't need to know any of that to understand this book. But she definitely made references to philosophy. I think it's just her day job, and it's bleeding through into the pages. The one thing that's truly tricky about this book is that there's a love pentagon. So I'm just going to read you the back cover of this book, and then we can try and unravel this very difficult naughty net. Jake is a clever, lazy, and scraping by in London as a hack French to English translator. Jake loves Anna. Anna is an elusive and lovely singer. Anna loves Hugo. Hugo is a fireworks manufacturer turned movie producer and majestic philosopher. Hugo loves Sadie. Sadie is a glossy and dazzling film starlet. Of course, Sadie loves Jake. Then there's the marvelous Mr. Mars, the famous hound, who might or might not be Jake's ticket up and out of this mess. I read this many times as I was reading the book because the back cover of the book does not match what is actually inside of the book, so let me simplify all of this for you so that you can understand the basics of this very interesting novel. There are only 3 main characters that actually matter in this book. The first is Jake, who is a writer by trade and somewhat of a failed writer. He released his first book, The Silencer, to some critical success, but unfortunately, Jake wrote about a subject he didn't know a lot about, which is Hugo's philosophical views on the world. And who is Hugo? Hugo is one of Jake's best friends, although you wouldn't think it given the way the book goes. Jake tried to become famous as an intellectual writer, but it didn't really work out because Jake isn't actually much of an intellectual himself. He's more of a Kramer, if you get the Seinfeld reference. However, they split up over the fact that Jake felt quite guilty that he accidentally sort of wrote a book about things his best friend said and then kind of didn't tell him. The whole point of this novel is actually that Jake is trying very hard to patch up his friendship with Hugo, because it seems everywhere that Jake goes, he has just missed Hugo in a hilarious comedy of circumstances. It sort of feels kind of like Waiting for Godot, only at least with Waiting for Godot, you know it was trying to be a postmodern take. You weren't too worried about the plot, but in this book, I do worry about the plot. Now, Hugo is someone who's both very successful in the real world and the world of modern thinking, because he is interacting with many people who are important and powerful in his day, and he has lots and lots of money. And like we always know, people love people with lots of money. Jake considers Hugo to be kind of a modern day philosopher that is speaking the truth to whatever Wittgenstein said. And Hugo and Jake form kind of this straight man comedy duo. And you can sort of see Jake is the fun friend. Hugo is the boring business friend that pays for everyone's drinks. But you invite him to the party, you still like him. It's because he's one of the only friends amongst your artsy group of friends who got a real job. And this book is full of artsy people who do not have a real job, who are in some way connected to Hugo and his money or his prestige. Now, the third and most important character of this book, or should I say plot device, is the dog Mr. Mars, who is a movie dog who is retired. Jake falls in love with as part of his many schemes to find and talk to Hugo. And this dog, the only reaction I had is that this is the silliest dog name I've heard since Beethoven. It's great because we see Jake fall in love with this dog, and Jake finally has someone or something to be responsible for. Because Jake isn't really competent or capable of strong, complex human relationships, and it really shows every time he meets a woman in the book. And I guess because he's not good with humans, it kind of makes sense that he's an animal person. Love Pentagon aside, this book is a thinly veiled comedy about philosophical ideas and the writer's dilemma, which makes a lot of sense because Jake is a writer. And that's all I can say about the good that's in the plot of this book. The main theme of this book, I think, is about the goal of wealth and fame being the main goal in anyone's life. And at the start of the book, we're really hit with a lot of moments where Jake thought what he wanted in his life was to be a famous writer, was to be an intellectual, considered high society. And what actually happened is, as he started to rise in acclaim and become more famous, he actually couldn't handle being an intellectual and riding in intellectual circles, because that's just not who he is. The Silencer, which is the debut novel that Jake wrote, was supposed to propel Jake to some kind of intellectual fame. However, ironically, as he became more famous for The Silencer, it became clearer and clearer that Jake was not only not an intellectual, but these were just ideas that Jake stole while he was having conversations with Hugo. Like they say, all great artists steal, and in this case, Jake literally stole someone else's ideas. And there's also some moral questions that are asked as Jake wrote this book about Hugo's ideas and created The Silencer and then got some critical acclaim out of it. Is there a moral problem with taking what your friends say or what other people say and basically plagiarizing it and turning it into a book for your profit? And that's a question you might be able to ask as part of the themes of this book if you were reflecting deeply on the nature of writing as perhaps the author wants us to. The way this book goes, where characters are missing when you think they should appear, and characters appear when they weren't really wanted in the scene, this book is a total and actual misconnections section on Craigslist. As part of the love connections in this book, no one ends up with the person they think they're supposed to end up with, and in each case, there's a little surprise about who ends up loving who. The sad and hilarious thing is, if you removed all the women in this book, the entire plot would still stand up on its own and maybe would be better for it. Because the real question the entire book we're asking is, will Jake find Hugo and will their friendship reignite? And I'll leave it to you and up to interpretation if you decide to read this book, if that's what you think happens. Now, onto the review. This book reads to me like an 80s adventure buddy comedy that never got published and or finished. The entire setup and the comedic flavor of the book reminds me of a lot of Martin Short movies or the Pink Panther movies, if you've ever seen those. I would be really, really complicit if I told you that the writing is one of the main draws of this book when this is a book about writing. That this particular book, for all its prose about writing and the writer's dilemma, has a lot of really, really terrible writing in it. Let me give you some examples. Like a sea wave curling over me came Anna's voice. This letter delighted me. I didn't know what pleased me most, its gentleness or its cunning. My need of Finn began to be very great and I had to force my attention away from it. I had some more drinks. What in the Wattpad nonsense is this? I know there's a simile and a metaphor, but like, calm down, Susan. And I hate to say it, but I really think she managed to get this published by accident more than skill. And if we really want to get into it, you know, for a book that's 300 pages, that has 7 main characters, I mean, it's just too much. And eventually all the women in this book blurred together because they were all just some form of mysterious, tempting woman that main character is interested in. I think this was about two men and their friendship, and I think the women had literally nothing to do with the rest of the book. The perfect example of this is the ending. The ending of this book. Ooh, I mean, it does stop, I guess. So after the main plot is done and sort of we're in the denouement period of the book where it tries to wrap things up, the book is wrapped up while talking about a box of kittens. And make of that subtext what you will. And when I say this, I mean that there's a description of a box of kittens. The book is over. That's basically how this book ends. And I don't feel bad spoiling it for you because it's not really an ending. It's just like, she ran out of paper or something. None of the relationships wrap up in any meaningful way. Jake, who started the book homeless, continues to be homeless at the end of the book. And no, I just don't think that this book has a real ending, and it really grates me in the way that most books do when they have no point by time you get to the end. So this book, while it tries, I think, to talk about being bohemian and creative and poor, there are many, many good plays and novels that do this. I just don't think that this is one of them. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I just read a romantic comedy book that was about the Holocaust, and it still had more charm and comedic uplifting moments than this book did. I mean, just go read Sophie's Choice. In the end, the problem with this book is it can't decide if it wants to be a romantic comedy or a philosophical comedy. As you can imagine, you can't really put the two together and get a great result that ends up in readers loving what you did. And if you really wanted to watch a movie that has sort of some of these philosophical, romantic, goofball comedy angles, just go watch Garden State. I mean, that's where Pixie Manic Girl Dream Girl came from. Okay, well, that's all the time under the net that I can spend. Well, if you enjoyed this review, I hope you like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to hit the bell notification so that you know when I post a new video. If you have thoughts about this book or if you think I got something wrong, feel free to leave comments in the comments below. Next time we will be reading The Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. And I hope you've been enjoying your summer reading. I feel like the summer's almost over, and I'm not ready for it to be over. And that's all for me this week. We'll see you again soon. Stay curious, stay reading.